Hey, everybody, welcome in. It is the Thursday edition of the Utopia Football Podcast. Of course, Thursday is guest day here on the podcast. I'm Sean Pendergast, one half of Payne and Pendergast on Sports Radio 610 mornings in Houston. And pleased to be joined by a favorite of our show here in Houston, because we play a lot of the audio of the Baldy's breakdowns on Payne and Pendergast. And he's one of our favorites, NFL Network and audio NFL insider, Brian Baldinger, and of course, 12 years in the NFL as well. Baldy, it's great to talk to you, man. Seth Payne is my co-host, and you probably know Seth,
Sure.
10-year defensive lineman in the NFL. We love playing the audio. I know the breakdowns are a video thing on Twitter that you do, but the audio is just as tremendous with your energy, and we play a lot of them because the Texans are so much more relevant now and have enough players that are worth breaking down. And I guess let's start right there. I mean, it seems like you show great enthusiasm for our Houston Texans here. Just before we get into some more specifics of their offseason, what are your thoughts on the first season, year one of D'Amico Ryans and C.J. Stroud?
It's been an amazing story, amazing turnaround. You can throw every superlative, adjective, you name it, and you probably can't ever get enough. But I just like the way that they played, Sean. I just liked how hard they played. I saw them play a couple times this year against the Titans, and they just outplayed them. I mean, they shut Derrick Henry down in that first game. I mean, nobody shuts down Derrick Henry like that. But that's who they were. I mean, they were downhill. I mean, every free agent they signed, they stepped up. They all played the game the right way. And so that was the big thing to me, was how they played the game the right way. They played with energy, they played with enthusiasm, and played with good fundamentals. They were a lot of fun to watch. They were, and then honestly, I get excited when I see the game played that style. And it's definitely a reflection of D'Amico and how he played, how he coaches, how he has coached. And so he set the tempo, and they followed it. And it was fun to see this team compete all year long like they did.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on D'Amico year one, and then obviously Nick Caserio, the general manager, who was in the building already for those first 2 years where they went through two head coaches. Yep. They hired D'Amico, he's obviously a Texans legend, but he's steeped in the 49er tree coming up through the coaching ranks, and Kyle Shanahan. And then you have Nick, who spent 2 decades with Bill Belichick. What are your thoughts on just the melding of those two, maybe the styles and the personalities and how they've worked together so far?
Well, I feel like I know D'Amico better than I know Nick, but that doesn't really matter here. You could tell that they work in lockstep, and it's been a long time since you could say that about Texans GM, whoever that was for a while, and the coach. They've got. I feel like the type of player that they brought in free agency, the type of player that they drafted, it feels like it's a D'Amico kind of guy. I mean, you go through the whole list. I don't care, Blake Cashman, all the guys that they signed last year. Steve Nelson, and the way that they played, and the way that they learned quickly, I feel like, and especially along the defensive front, Jerry Hughes, all the guys that they brought in, they all bought in, and you could just tell, like they fit in the culture of what he was trying to bring, and the type of, just the type of excitement and being ready game day ready, was what I would describe a D'Amico player. Like, they don't need a quarter to get ready. They hit the field, they're ready to play.
Yeah. I saw that you did a video, you did a breakdown of the Texans and the two of the key pieces they brought in. And then obviously I know one of your favorites is Will Anderson, who's already there. So I wanted to touch on each of those guys here on the podcast with you, Baldy. But let's start with Danielle Hunter, who I feel like that signing really feels like it. I think the Texans were already a team that people were starting to get behind heading into next season. That Danielle Hunter signing, though, feels like it really moved the needle quite a bit for people with the Texans. What are your thoughts? How does he change things for D'Amico Ryans?
One, once Chris Jones got re-signed by Kansas City, Danielle was my number one free agent in the whole business. I mean, I don't care any position. He was the number one guy. And in large part because of the seasons that he has stacked together, but especially this past season, where, the forced fumbles, the sacks, the game-changing type plays, it was there on a defense that really improved a great deal under Brian Flores. So and then just talking to guys around the league, talking to guys like Lane Johnson has to go up against him, and how difficult he is to block, and how slippery he is because of his length and his effort. So then you combine all those things, you go, okay, where could he land? And so I had places you could land him, but I figured that the Texans were going to lose Jonathan Greenard, and he really stepped up last year and full-time starter, had a good year. But once Minnesota signed him, I thought, well, you got to replace that. That's a tough guy to replace because I don't know, Jonathan, he's 25, 24 years old. He's young, looking for that second contract. But when they replaced him with Daniil, I said they upgraded the position. They upgraded it because of his flexibility, where you could play him, how you could play him. You can do a lot of things with Daniil. You could play him inside. You could play him outside, left side, right side. You could do a lot with him. And I thought he'd be the perfect complement, I think, to Will. Not that Will needs any guidance. I think he's on his own trajectory. But it's nice to have a veteran, 29 years old, who's done a lot in this league and been around a while, and a guy that's from Katy, wanted to come back to Houston. Probably could have signed in other places, Sean, from what I hear, but he wanted to be in Houston. I think that's a big deal. Yeah. Players that want to be, it's one thing to go chase a check, to go get the opportunity. Another thing to like that destination, it all comes together. Contract, money, destination, team money upswing. I think all those things are, a credit to D'Amico, the organization now, and how Daniil was thinking.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, like even look, D'Amico was here a year ago for free agency. He hadn't coached a game yet, but he was here. But I don't think that deal, if Daniil Hunter's a free agent last year, I don't think he's signing with the Texans on a 2-year, $48 million deal before he's seen what it looks like with D'Amico. But I think it says a lot about the season they just had that he wants to be here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And same with D'Amico. Danico Autry is such an underrated player. And I know that phrase underrated get tossed around, but 2 years ago, Tennessee was the number one defense in the league. They had the best defensive front of anybody. Now they were the number one seed. They lost to Cincinnati, but like they ripped Joe Burrow, Patrick Mahomes, they tore them apart. And Danico with Jeffrey Simmons and Aaron Landry and all the guys they had there, they were a force. Yeah. And you watch Danico, I don't care when he was with the Oakland Raiders, everywhere he's been, Indianapolis, he's been an impactful player. Yeah. And he's really a good pass rusher, but more than that, he's a good football player. Mm-hmm. And they got themselves, I think he's in his 10th year now, but they got themselves a good football player.
We had Nick Caserio. Seth and I had Nick Caserio on our show on Monday, and we went through all these guys with him. And he was kind of classic Nick the whole time, very even keel talking about guys. We got to Danico Autry, Baldy. Yeah. And he said he's a badass, he's a bad MFer, he's a junkyard dog, and he's a guy that you would want in a dark alley with you. And oh, by the way, he's like you just said, he's also a good football player too. But I don't know that Nick has ever gone that over the top on a player, certainly on our show, and he's usually very even-keeled at press conferences as well. He likes Danico Autry as easily as much as you do, I think.
Well, I mean, I remember Jack Del Rio was the coach of the Raiders when they drafted Danico. And I remember when he went to I stay in touch with Jack. Mm-hmm. And I remember I think he went to Indy maybe before he went to Tennessee. And he was like, I'm just glad to see my guys doing good out there, Baldy, that kind of like, he's got a track record now. And over the last 3 years in Tennessee, if you count the playoffs, he's put up 30 sacks in the last 3 years. And mostly from rushing from the inside, the interior, and he's coming off, I think, his best season. Mm-hmm. So I think you got a really good football player. And, whether it's running stunts with Daniil now or playing him inside or putting Daniil, like you just have real flexibility. And then we haven't even got to Foley. Like I do a lot of stuff for the Jets, and I followed Foley since he was a free agent with them, and they didn't want to lose him. They never replaced Foley. They tried. He went to Jacksonville, did well. He's just a big, wide body. He's more of a run stuffer than a pass rusher, but he can win one-on-ones. He can push the pocket. He's a big body that's still got youth to him. Been pretty healthy. Like I think Foley is a really good football player too.
Yeah, I think that's the concern. You just touched on it because I think Texan fans are super excited about what the Texans did at the defensive end. And I know Autry is a guy that can kind of flip back and forth, but ideally, he's not a 3 technique or anything like that. He bumps inside on passing downs. But I think Texan fans are maybe a little concerned or confused. Sheldon Rankins walks in free agency. He was a productive player for them last year. Malik Collins gets traded for a 7th-round pick, which seems strange, although it's sort of tied to what looked like an Eric Armstead deal possibly that never that never ended up happening.
Mm-hmm.
So you touch on Fatukasi. They signed Tim Settle as well. They've got some guys, Khalil Davis and Heinisch in the building. What are your thoughts about that? I mean, you just shared your thoughts on Fatukasi, but could it be where maybe the bling or the glitz isn't there, like the splash plays like Rankins and Malik Collins were getting, but maybe these are more D'Amico Ryans type of guys when it comes to anchoring down in the middle?
Well, I think you need an anchor inside.
Yeah.
They were very good against the run last year with Malik and Sheldon and all those guys rotated through there, and they were all very, very good signings. But Foley is a different size type player. Like he can really take that one technique and really eat those double teams up and free up, the linebackers, which I'm sure you're going to get to here. But, I think he's got a real role with that football team right now. And, Mario Williams and all the other guys up front that they've signed, they've got good depth. And if you follow D'Amico, you follow the 49ers, I mean, they're too deep on their defensive line. And I remember one year, Nick Bosa was doing a 49er game, and Nick bumped into me like on purpose. And he's like, I see where you got Max Crosby as your defensive player of the year. And I said, well, this is like week 15, there's still a couple weeks left. Yeah. I go, well, he plays every snap, Nick, and you don't do that. He goes, yeah, but I'm trying to win a Super Bowl. Meaning, like, I'm pacing myself to get to February and play in February, which it registered right away with me. But that's how D'Amico's thinking. He's thinking, like, we can't play Will Anderson 80% of the snaps.
Right.
We've got to rotate these guys up front. We got to keep them healthy for January football. And he's building that depth on the defensive line right now.
Yeah, he always talks about 8 guys. You got to have 8 guys. D'Amico Ryans always says that. So before we get to the linebackers, we've mentioned Will Anderson a couple times here. I always loved your breakdowns of Will during the season, starting with week 1 of the sack of Lamar Jackson, and then he was enough of a beast in the second half of the season when he was healthy to take home Defensive Rookie of the Year. What are your thoughts about the ceiling for Will? I mean, you mentioned names like Max Crosby and Nick Bosa, guys that you watch and talk to and things like that. Does Will Anderson have that kind of ceiling as an edge rusher in the NFL?
Yeah, I do. I think so. I thought he was the most polished guy coming out of college. He could have come out a year before. He did, and he would have been a top pick. But I thought just because of his array of moves, how slippery he is, his takeoff, his effort, like it's all there. It's just a question of, okay, now this is the NFL. Okay, now they're going to start game planning you. They're going to chip you. They're going to slide to you. Free offensive line is going to come and get you. So you can win initially, but you're going to get hit and whammed and all these things. So that's just a question of building up your arsenal to be able to defend and defeat a lot of that stuff. But I do think that his numbers will even go up, because now you've got a number of guys that can win one-on-ones. Yeah. And all you really want to do is just affect the quarterback, whether it's getting him off the spot, moving him. Because once that happens, then your speed, your effort, all that stuff that TJ, that Nick, that Max, all those guys at the top of the leaderboard when it comes to those positions, they get a lot of their sacks because of that. Somebody else has flushed that quarterback. Now it's a team game. Like we all share in the success of everybody else, but that's kind of how it's going to look, I think.
Yeah. So the linebackers, Christian Harris, ascending player, I think, second half of last year. And then you mentioned Blake Cashman before, who had a really good season for the Texans. Azeez Al-Shire has history with D'Amico Ryans in San Francisco and had a really good prove-it year last year in Tennessee. We know how important the linebackers are in D'Amico Ryans' scheme. What are your thoughts on particularly the acquisition of Al-Shire, but in conjunction with the ascension of Christian Harris?
Well, I'm a big Al-Shire fan. When he was in San Francisco, I'm pretty good friends with Fred Warner and usually talk to him quite a bit. And I remember asking him, like, it was him and Dre Greenlaw, like they're the best tandem in the business. But Azeez played. He had his role when teams went 2 tight ends or whatever the formation was. He was out there. So I didn't know much about him. I'm like, Fred, when I watch him, are these run blitzes? Is somebody calling his number to go? Because he gets there awfully fast. He goes, Baldy, he just he fires his pistol and he's out of there. There are run blitzes. That's how he reads and how fast he reads. And so, anyways, I did some breakdowns with Azeez, and then this year in Tennessee, and then I actually met him for the first time this year, and he was appreciative of some of the things I've done.
Yeah,
he's a great football player. he didn't get much of a chance to start because of who was behind in San Francisco. When Dre would get thrown out of the game for being too violent or whatever, he'd step in. That's kind of the only chances he had because Fred never came off the field.
Right.
But he got his chance last year.
Yeah.
D'Amico knew what he was getting. He's a hell of a football player. He's very fast. He can cover, but he's lightning to the ball now. And I hope that he gets more recognition, in a place like Houston now because he's. It's hard to find those guys that play that fast.
Yeah, Nick had mentioned they tried to get him last year when he was a free agent coming out of San Francisco, and they, just didn't happen, but it was able to happen this time around. I know they're really glad to have him. Flipping over to the offensive side of the ball, and I know I want to talk about CJ with you in a second, but the big acquisition over there was Joe Mixon, and they immediately signed him to a 3-year extension to go with the trade to bring him in from Cincinnati. What do you feel like the Texans are getting in Joe Mixon that maybe they weren't getting out of the running back position last season with Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary?
Well, I don't know what happened to Dameon after his rookie year. Like I don't know enough to even comment. Like he just was not very effective, and Devin stepped in. Motor had some really good games, especially once he began starting, like maybe week 6 or 7. Motor was really strong, but Joe Mixon is a different player. I mean, Joe Mixon, first of all, he leaves a culture in Cincinnati where it was a good culture. Yeah. I mean, it was offense pulling for defense, defense pulling for offense. Joe's a team guy. There's nothing he can't do. He's a screen guy. He can run routes. He'll block, protect your quarterback, and he's a good runner, really good runner. I think he's got good football left. I've been a Joe Mixon fan since when he was in junior college, went to Oklahoma, and all that. I think they're getting an upgrade at that position and a big body. I mean, he's 225 pounds, whatever. I mean, he's a big guy that runs with power, and I think he's, a lot of running backs fall off the cliff after a while, but I think he's got a lot of football left.
Yeah, he's still, he's only 27 years old. It feels like he's been around forever.
Yeah.
He's only 27. It's funny, with Pierce, I'll tell you, Baldy, I do the post-game show for the Texans on game day with Clint Stoerner. Mm-hmm. And we had Dameon on the post-game show late in the season. He was our guest. It was that game where they got blown out by Cleveland, but he had the 100-yard kickoff return. He just started returning kicks that day. That was the first time he told us in the post-game. First time he'd return kicks since like junior high, but he wasn't on the field because Singletary had taken over.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting how candid he's candid about everything. He's a great kid, but he said he's having trouble picking up that Kubiak Shanahan running game where it's plant your foot in the ground, find the gap. He's doing a lot of shuffling of his feet and things like that. Yeah. And he was so honest with it, Baldy. He said that, to be truthful, and this is in week 16, he goes, to be truthful, the Texans probably aren't going to get the version of me that they want until next season. He's like, I need another offseason because for whatever reason, it just wasn't clicking with him. I don't know. I mean, you obviously watch miles and miles of film with this Kubiak Shanahan offense. I mean, is it one of those things where maybe like the light goes on for a running back all of a sudden? I mean, Derrick Henry's talking about how he had difficulty picking up the outside zone stuff.
I think it can. Not everybody's successful in it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
The one thing that Dameon had coming out of Florida in the first year with the Texans was unbelievable contact balance.
Yeah.
He just ran through contact. And, he never got to that point because of what you're just talking about. It just wasn't fluid for him.
He's thinking too much, maybe.
Yeah. And so, he couldn't even get to the point where he's building up this incredible power that he has. Mm-hmm. And, that's one of the things that made him attractive. He didn't play that much at Florida. He wasn't that much, wear and tear off his body. So I knew he wasn't beat up, and you're averaging 2.5 yards a carry. You're not going to get a lot of carries in this league. But, the guys that I think the daylight and the light can come on in this system. And it is a marriage between the line, which was shuffled quite a bit last year because of injuries. Yeah. There is a marriage between the back and the line and where those cuts got to be. And I just remember going way back in the day when Alex Gibbs was teaching this and how hard he coached it and how specific it had to be. And it does have to be coached very hard. There is landmarks. There is different things that you got to get to before you make that cut. And so I think his honesty though is pretty eye opening for me. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does this year.
Yeah, I am too. We're all big Dameon Pierce fans. It was really tough to watch him. I mean, he played no snaps in the Ravens playoff loss. It was remarkable. All right, a couple more things before I cut you loose. Let's talk about CJ Stroud. Obviously, an incredible rookie season. What's the biggest thing from having watched CJ Stroud in his rookie year? What's the biggest improvement or advancement in his game that you want to see in year 2 from CJ?
Well, I mean, he's already. I mean, Nico Collins was there for 2 years, and I don't think anybody paid any attention to Nico Collins. Yeah. But now you get an elite player at that position. Nico looks like a number one.
Yep.
Like all these guys. Tank Dell, just excels. Dalton Schultz, has to be re-signed after the year he had. Like everybody that they plugged in there benefited because of CJ and his accuracy, how he sees the field, how he goes through progressions. That to me, as good as he was, I feel like it can only get better. I don't see, maybe, look, to turn the ball over 5 times, throw 5 interceptions in a season for anybody, Aaron Rodgers, anybody, is crazy. So, sometimes that might change. It might be 9 this year, but, you could tell he sees the field very well. Yeah. Sometimes balls get tipped. All those things can lead to interception. So I don't know that you're going to see that again. But still, I just think everything, even the playoff loss to Baltimore, you learn from that. You learn what, how they play that matchup zone and how you've got to see things after the snap. You're not going to rely so much on what you see before the snap. It's all kind of looking the same at you. And then the ball snapped and here they come. And so I think you can learn a lot maybe from that playoff loss, just the playoff intensity, the speed of the game, going up against the number 1 defense and what some of the challenges that presents. So I think from that standpoint, I think we're only going to see, more improvement in just the subtle things.
I guess last thing, just in quarterback position in general, because obviously there's a big focus on quarterbacks coming into this draft. There's going to be 3 taken in the top 3, probably, maybe even 4, JJ McCarthy sneaks in there or whatever. But we've been talking a lot lately about, CJ in the since that draft of 2020, where you had Herbert and Tua and obviously Joe Burrow, it's been real sketchy since then. CJ might be the only, depending on what Trevor Lawrence turns into here going in, CJ might be the only good quarterback drafted in these 3 drafts so far between 21, 22, and 23. Do you have a theory or anything like that on where the quarterback position is and why maybe we've hit this rough patch here of quarterbacks over the last 2-3 years?
I'm a little, it's a conundrum like every other GM that drafts these guys. The one thing that we can see from CJ in the class that you mentioned, with Joe, is they took bad teams and made them good teams right away. Yeah. Matt Ryan did that. He took a team 3-13, 13-3. The good ones just elevate everybody around them. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we watch these guys just in a vacuum and we're looking at their arm strength and a pro day here. And we're not seeing the ability to learn the offense the way CJ learned the offense. Maybe week 1, there was a struggle against Baltimore, maybe, whatever. But it happened very quickly. And, it didn't happen like that. Obviously, Mac Jones had some success, and Trevor's had some good days. But for the most part, these guys have not elevated the franchise. Trevor did to a degree. He got to the playoffs in the second year, so I don't want to discount him. But Mac. Zach Wilson and some of these guys, they're not the guy. And I don't know how much you have to watch before you realize that. Yeah. And so can that guy elevate everybody, including, the secretaries and everybody in the building? They walk in and everybody feels better about their chances on Sunday because of the third down conversion rate, staying on the field, taking the team down the field to win games the way CJ did throughout the year, playing big in big moments. But it's you just watch and evaluate these guys in a bubble. Sometimes you lose all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell you as somebody who's around that build, CJ and Will and D'Amico elevate the building. The 3 of them elevate the building. And that's a special trait, right? Yeah. Brian Baldinger, NFL Network, Odyssey NFL Insider. Baldy's breakdowns. And I'd follow you on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it these days, Brian. But what's the Twitter/X handle for you?
It's Baldy NFL at Baldy NFL.
Yep. Okay, Baldy NFL.
Instagram and on X, both. Yes,
on the gram as well. All right,
yeah.
So we got you on all the platforms. And I double checked when we scheduled this. I knew it was the first day of the NCAA tournament, and I know you're a proud Duke Blue Devil as well. They don't play till tomorrow, so I wanted to make sure. I know you're a football guy, but I'm guessing you're going to be in front of the TV the next couple of days.
This weekend I could watch a few of the games for sure. Old habits die hard, Sean.
Of course. Baldy, man, really appreciate it.
Yeah,
enjoy your work. Keep up the great work, and we'll be talking down the road.
You bet. Thanks, Sean. Good job.
All right, thanks. Okay, that's the great Brian. Yeah. Thank you. That's the great Brian Baldinger joining me here on the Utopia Football Podcast. Good stuff. And again, at Baldy NFL is where you can find him on X. But just I love the breakdowns, and was really looking forward to that conversation. He's a big fan of what's happening on defense for the Houston Texans, and obviously a big fan of C.J. Stroud as well. As far as some of the other items, real quick, a reminder to subscribe, rate, review the podcast. You can see that right below. Appreciate everybody who clicks that subscribe button. Hopefully you're enjoying the guests that we're having on Thursdays, and you're enjoying the mailbag. Oh, let's make sure we mention that. The mailbag, houmailbag@gmail.com. There you go. If you're watching on the stream, there's the email address right there, houmailbag@gmail.com. We'll do a mailbag episode on Tuesday. Certainly a lot to get into there. But a reminder again, if you listen to the podcast, you're just getting it now. Tell a friend, subscribe, rate, review. And kind of a slow last couple of days. The only thing with the Texans, I would say, the re-signing of Derek Barnett, which I really, really like, deepens that defensive end room. And I would say the re-signing of Steven Sims in the return game. He's the last one to score a touchdown for the Houston Texans in that playoff game against Baltimore. So thumbs up on both of those things. So we'll be back on Tuesday, maybe a little earlier. I actually have, believe it or not, you see C.J. Stroud right there behind me on a TV screen in my on the stream. I actually have an event with C.J. Stroud on Tuesday. I'm interviewing him for Christus Health for a fundraiser. So podcast, I say all that to say the podcast schedule may be a little bit sideways next week. We will see when we get to next week. But again, appreciate everybody tuning in. houmailbag@gmail.com. A reminder, Sean Pendergast, Seth Payne and Pendergast, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Sports Radio 610 and on the Odyssey app. So appreciate everybody tuning in there as well. So for Brian Baldinger, who was a great guest today on the program, Anthony Irwin, who is the producer of this podcast. He's not in the waiting room today, but I know he's the one that's going to get this podcast out to you. He's in Vegas getting ready to hopefully win a ton of money on the NCAA tournament. I'm Sean Pendergast. We are out of time. We will see all of you on Tuesday of next week or early next week for the next episode of the Utopia Football Podcast.